Eli Sohn woke up in a hospital bed, in a body that was not his, with a ring on his finger he had never seen, and an alpha he had never met, asleep with his forehead on Eli's wrist. The scent was wrong. Everything was wrong. The last thing he remembered was snow, and a grocery store parking lot, and a truck he did not see coming. The alpha lifted his head. He looked at Eli like he was the only thing in the world that had ever mattered. "Yoel," he said, "you came back to me." Eli's name was not Yoel. He was 26 years old. He had been crossing a street in Colorado, and then there had been nothing. And then there had been this. The bond mark on his neck that he did not know was there had started to pulse, and he could feel grief pouring through it that was not his own. And he could not say a word, because telling this man the truth would break his life for the second time in days. Before we dive in, let me know in the comments where you are watching from. Now, back to today's story. Eli had been in the hospital bed for a little over a day when he stopped being able to lie to himself about what was happening. He had told himself at first that he was dreaming, that this was what the brain generated when it was trying very hard to process something that had gone terribly wrong, and that if he waited long enough, he would wake up in his studio apartment above the laundromat in Colorado, with the radiator ticking and the cat from downstairs meowing outside the window, and the afternoon light coming through the blinds the way it always did before the late shift. He had waited for that. Through the long, dark hours while the alpha, whose name he had now heard people say, slept, with his head pillowed on crossed arms at the edge of the bed. Through the nurse's visits, where a woman in pale blue scrubs had come in to check the machines and had smiled at him, like someone smiles at a patient they are glad is not dead. Through the first gray light at the window, which had come from the wrong direction because this was not his window, and had not woken him up because he was already awake. He was not dreaming. He had been an Omega in Colorado, unmated, unbonded, unremarkable. The kind of Omega whose scent was so faint most people forgot his designation within minutes of meeting him. The body he was in now was Omega too, but the scent was different. Wet stone and dried lavender and something faintly sweet underneath, like the skin of a pear left in a cold room. It was Yoel's scent. It came from Yoel's glands. And every time the nurses leaned in to check a bandage or adjust a line, they breathed it in without comment, because to them it was just their patient's scent, unchanged, familiar. He knew he was not dreaming because the body he was in kept demanding things: water, a bathroom, a specific ache in a bruised rib that dreams do not bother to simulate. The nurse had helped him sit up the first time, and the room had tilted sideways, and the nausea had been real, and the alpha had held the back of his neck with a steadiness that nobody dreamed. Dreams did not give you the weight of a hand cradling your skull like it was a thing worth protecting. Dreams let you go. "Suno," the nurse called him. "Dr. Ryu," said the other nurse, the one who came in at the shift change with a look of recognition that told Eli the alpha was not just any alpha in this hospital. He was somebody here. He worked here. He belonged to this building like Eli had belonged to the grocery store, except that in Suno's case, belonging looked like being handed a clipboard and addressed by name by every person who walked past the door. Suno, Dr. Ryu, husband. Husband to the person whose body Eli was inside of. Husband to the person whose chart, which Eli had managed to twist his neck far enough to read on the second day, said Yoel on, age 29. Admitted, January the 6th. Pedestrian versus motor vehicle. Severe concussion. Hairline fracture to the left wrist. Contusions. The notes from the days that followed were the ones that mattered. Brain activity, absent. Prognosis, none. Suno had been told to start making decisions no husband should have to make. And then, on the night of the 9th, the monitors had changed. Eli did the math in his head with the part of his brain that was still working. He had been hit by a truck in Colorado on the night of January the 9th. He remembered that because it had been payday, and he had cashed the check at the gas station on the corner, and the receipt was still in his back pocket. January the 9th, in Colorado. January the 6th, 3 days earlier, in Anchorage. Yoel On's brain had gone quiet 3 days before Eli Sohn's did, but Yoel had not died, officially. because Yoel An was sitting up in this hospital bed breathing air through lungs that still worked. Yoel An, as far as everyone in this building was concerned, had simply woken up, had come back. The nurses kept using that word, back, as if back were a direction you could return from. But the body he was in did not know how to work its own face. And the Alpha, at the edge of the bed, loved the person this body had belonged to, with a devotion Eli could feel through the bond mark every time Sunno reached for his hand. Eli had a theory. The theory was that whatever had happened in the dark between a truck on a Colorado street and a hospital room in Anchorage, it had put him in a body whose original owner had not been in it anymore. He did not know the physics of it. He did not know the metaphysics of it. He did not know whether there was some cosmic clerical error he could write to about a transfer, or whether there was a God somewhere who owed him an apology. What he knew was that Yoel An's husband was holding his hand, and that if Eli said the wrong word, in the wrong voice, at the wrong moment, that husband's whole world was going to end for the second time in days. So Eli did not say the wrong thing. He said very little at all, at first. He let Sunno talk. He let the nurses do the talking. He let the doctor, who was not Sunno but who apparently worked with Sunno, come in and shine a light in his eyes and ask him to track a finger and squeeze a hand and tell her his name. He said the name on the chart. He said it slowly, like he was not sure of it, because he was not sure of it, and the doctor had nodded and made a note and looked at Sunno with a gentleness Eli recognized from the other side of a counter. The gentleness you showed someone whose world had almost ended and was still figuring out whether it had. His scans are clean, the doctor said to Sunno, not to Eli. Honestly, given what we came in with, this is the best I could have asked for. Nothing structural. He is going to be okay. She glanced at Eli, then back. In rare cases, trauma like this comes with some memory loss. Not much we can do about it medically when the scans look like this. If it sticks around, a psychologist might help. Most of the time, it just sorts itself out. Eli watched Sunno take the words into himself one at a time. Clean scans. Best he could have asked for. He watched the relief move through Sunno's shoulders by a small fraction and stop there, because Sunno was a doctor and knew that a clean scan was not the same as a recovery. He was waiting for the recovery. He did not know yet that the recovery was not coming, because the man who was supposed to be doing the recovering was not in the room. Eli also heard the part about memory loss, and he filed it away. It was thinner cover than he wanted. It was cover for forgetting a word, for being slow on a name, for waking up confused. It was not cover for the things he was actually going to need to forget. He was going to have to be careful with it. Okay, Sunno said. His voice was still the quiet voice from the first moment, the voice that sounded like it was being issued from somewhere deep in his chest with great care, so as not to spend more than it had. He reached for Eli's hand again without asking. Eli let him take it, because the alternative was pulling away, and pulling away from this man for no visible reason was a cruelty. Eli could not bring himself to commit. Okay, Sunno said again. We can be patient. When the doctor left, Sunno turned the full weight of his attention on Eli, and Eli had to remind himself to breathe. Yoel, Sunno said, do you remember me? And Eli, who had been rehearsing his answer for the better part of an hour, said the only thing he had come up with that was not an outright lie. Your face, he said. I remember your face. It was true, in a small way. He did remember Sunno's face. He had been looking at it for a day. Sunno's expression softened into something so grateful it made Eli's throat hurt, and Eli understood, right then, that every honest half-truth he could scrape together was going to be received as a gift, because the alternative was a truth that would break this man in half. That is enough, Sunno said. That is more than enough. We will do the rest together. He pressed Eli's knuckles to his mouth again. The bond mark on Eli's neck flared warm and confused, and full of a tenderness that did not belong to him. And Eli held very still, and closed his eyes, and let himself be loved for the first time in his life by a man who thought he was someone else. They kept him in the hospital for 4 more days of observation. 4 mornings of the same nurse, and the same light, and the same chair, pulled up to the same side of the bed. 4 afternoons of Sunno leaving for an hour at a time to make a phone call or sign a form or stand at the nurse's station with his arms crossed, talking quietly to a colleague, and 4 returns, each time, with his hand finding Eli's hand the moment he sat down again. By the end of the 4th day, Eli had stopped flinching when the door opened, because the door always meant Sunno. On the 5th morning, they discharged him. Sunno signed the paperwork himself. Not as a husband, as a physician. The nurses handed him the folder with the easy familiarity of coworkers, and Sunno signed each sheet in a small, precise hand, and Eli, sitting in the wheelchair the hospital required for the trip to the front doors, watched the whole process through the strange filter of having never been to a hospital for anything serious before in either of his lives. He understood, watching, that Sunno was a person who took charge of things without announcing that he was taking charge of them. He understood that Sunno had a reputation in this building that was older than Eli's presence in it. He understood that Sunno was walking his husband out of the trauma bay where he himself worked, and that every person they passed was watching, quietly, with a respect reserved for doctors who had almost lost what they could not fix. Outside, it was snowing again. Not the heavy wall of the storm that had put Yoel in the ambulance, just the fine, slow flurries that Anchorage wore between weather systems. The kind of snow that looked like it had been falling forever and would keep falling forever. Sunno had brought a jacket for him. It was dove gray and soft, and smelled faintly of cold teak and black plum. A scent Eli was starting to understand was just Sunno's skin when Sunno was not trying. He put the jacket around Eli's shoulders without asking, zipped it halfway, pulled the hood up, and tucked a piece of hair behind Eli's ear in a gesture so practiced that Eli could tell, just from the angle of it, that Sunno had done it 1,000 times before. The hair was black and a little too long. Eli had seen it in the bathroom mirror that morning for the first time, and the face under it had been the face of a man he had never met, and he had held on to the sink for a long time before he had been able to brush his teeth. "Truck is right here," Sunno said. His truck was a dark green pickup, clean inside, with a thermos in the cup holder and a book face down on the passenger seat that Sunno moved without comment when he helped Eli climb in. Eli glanced at the title. It was a hardcover about seabirds. He filed the information away without knowing why he was filing it, except that every scrap he could gather about the life he was inside of felt important. The drive to the house was quiet. Anchorage in January was a color Eli did not have a name for. White, where the snow lay on everything in long, even blankets, and gray where the sky met the ridgeline, and a flat blue-black where the spruce stood against the snow so dark they looked almost ink. The road wound up along a ridge, and then down through a stand of spruce, and then up again, and Eli pressed his forehead to the cold window glass and tried to memorize the turns, because at some point he was going to need to know how to get home to a house he had never seen. Sunno's hand came to rest on his thigh. Light, familiar, a touch that was asking nothing, just saying, "I am here." Eli did not move his leg. He watched the fog roll over the hood of the truck and told himself that if he let himself enjoy the weight of Sunno's hand on his thigh, he was a thief, and a bad one. He told himself that, and he did not move his leg anyway, because moving it would have been the first crack in the mask, and he was not ready for that yet. He was not ready for anything yet. All he could do was breathe and let the fog come up and pretend that this was a drive he had taken before. The house was at the end of a gravel road that ended in a stand of spruce. It was smaller than Eli had expected. Weathered cedar siding gone silver with age, a porch with 2 chairs and a table between them, a hanging basket with a plant that had not been watered since before the accident and was complaining about it visibly. Sunno parked the truck and sat for a moment with his hand still on Eli's thigh and did not move to get out. "I should have watered the fern," he said. It was the first full sentence he had said in many miles. Eli looked at him, because the tone in his voice was a tone Eli had not heard from him yet. It was not the voice of a husband. It was the voice of a man who had stepped outside his own grief for half a second and looked back at it and been horrified at what he saw. "It is just a fern," Eli said. His voice, coming out of Yoelan's throat, did not sound like his voice. It was lower than his voice had been, softer in the vowels. He had not gotten used to hearing it yet. Sunno made a sound that might have been the start of a laugh, or the start of something much worse. "You are going to repot it this month." "I can still repot it." He said it without thinking, and as soon as he said it, he wanted to take it back, because "I can still repot" it was something Yoel would say, and he did not know if Yoel would have said it. And Sunno's hand on his thigh went very quiet. Then Sunno nodded, slowly, and got out of the truck. Inside the house, Eli learned the first rule of pretending to be a dead man. The rule was that the dead man was everywhere, and that you were allowed to get him wrong, but only in small ways, because there was a limit to how many small wrongnesses a grieving husband could absorb in a day without starting to notice the pattern. Eli got things wrong all afternoon. He reached for a light switch in the kitchen that was higher than he expected, because his old kitchen had been in a different building, in a different state, and his hand hit blank wall. He sat down in the chair at the table that was clearly the chair closer to the window, and Sunno, bringing over 2 mugs of tea, paused for a half second with the mugs in his hands before crossing to the other side and sitting across from him. And Eli understood, from the pause, that he had taken Yoel's chair. Sunno did not say anything about it. He just sat down in the wrong chair and pushed one of the mugs toward Eli, and the tea was some herbal thing with a flower in it that Eli did not know the name of. And Eli drank it because Sunno was watching him drink it, and because Yoel had presumably liked it. The tea was not bad. It tasted like a garden in summer. Eli wrapped both hands around the mug to warm them and let the steam hit his face, and let himself pretend, just for a second, that this was his house and his kitchen, and his husband across the table. And the pretending was so strong and so sudden that he had to put the mug down before his hands started shaking. "I am a little tired," he said. "Come lie down," Sunno said. He did not touch Eli to guide him. He just stood and walked ahead of him down a hall. Eli did not know, and Eli followed, memorizing the layout as he went. Living room on the left, with a low couch and a wood stove and a stack of books on the end table, the top one bookmarked a third of the way in. A closed door on the right that Sunno did not open and did not look at as he passed. A bathroom. Another door. Ajar. The bedroom. The bedroom was very still. It was not messy. It was not pristine, either. It had the particular stillness of a room that someone had left in a hurry, and no one had touched since. A sweater folded on the chair by the window. A book on the nightstand on the left side of the bed, open and face down, the pages gone soft from sitting. A pair of reading glasses beside the book. A glass of water on the same nightstand, the water lowered by weeks of evaporation. A paperback on the right nightstand that Eli understood, without being told, was Sunno's. A pair of slippers half under the bed, one tipped on its side, the other upright. Neither of them moved. Sunno stopped in the doorway. It was the smallest stop Eli had ever seen a man make. A half-second of hesitation so small that if Eli had blinked, he would have missed it, and then Sunno walked into the bedroom like the room was not the room it was. He turned down the blankets on the left side, the side with the glasses and the face-down book, and he stepped back. "Do you want the window open?" he said. Eli did not know whether Yoel wanted the window open or not. He took a guess based on the weather, which was cold and wet, and said, "No." "Okay." Sunno left him to get changed. There were clothes in the dresser that Eli had to rummage for, because he did not know which drawer held the pajamas. And he opened the wrong drawer first and stared for a long moment at a neat stack of soft t-shirts that were clearly Yoel's good shirts before closing it and finding the right drawer on the second try. He put on a pair of flannel pants and a t-shirt that was too loose on him, which either meant Yoel had been thinner in the last few weeks than he had been before, or that it was one of Sunno's shirts. He could not tell. He got into Yoel's side of the bed. The pillow smelled like the combined scent, the one that existed when their bodies had been in the same space for so long that the air between them had become its own thing. Not teak, not stone, not lavender, not plum, something else. Like a greenhouse after a rainstorm, earth and glass and trapped warmth, alive in a way that neither scent carried alone. He put his face into it and breathed in, and the bond mark on his neck flared warm and confused, and he realized he was crying, and that he did not know who the tears were for. Yoel, whom he had never met. Sun-Oh, whom he had just met. Eli Sohn, who had died standing up on a Tuesday in January and was not going to be missed by anyone in Colorado because there had been no one in Colorado to miss him. He was still crying, silently, when Sun-Oh came back in and lay down on the other side of the bed without turning on the lamp. Sun-Oh did not touch him. Eli understood this was a kindness. The Alpha was giving him space. The Alpha was giving him the room. A person who had been unresponsive for a week was allowed to need. The Alpha was lying on his back on his side of the bed, with his hands folded on his chest and his eyes on the ceiling, and the Alpha was crying too, silently, with a restraint that told Eli Sun-Oh had cried silently in a hospital chair for many nights in a row before this one, and had not let anyone see. After a long time, Sun-Oh said, "I love you." He did not turn his head. Eli did not turn his head either. He looked at the ceiling, and he breathed around the thing in his throat that was trying to come up, and he said, very quietly, "I know." It was the only thing he could say. It was the truest thing that had come out of his mouth since he had woken up. The Alpha beside him believed the knowing was the knowing of a husband, but the knowing was the knowing of someone who had been in the room for less than a week and had watched a man sign discharge papers for his husband with hands that did not shake, and had watched that same man walk a fern past a bedroom doorway without looking at the bedroom, and had understood, then, the weight of what this love was and what it had been surviving. Sun-Oh's hand moved across the blanket and found his, and laced their fingers together. His thumb pressed into the scrape on Eli's index knuckle, gently, the same spot as the hospital, and Eli understood that this was a habit, that Sun-Oh had done this every night for years. That Yoel's hand had belonged in Sun-Oh's hand for so long that Sun-Oh was reaching for it now without looking, like a man reaching for a light switch in a room he had lived in his whole life. Eli let him hold it. He did not pull away. The bond mark on his neck hummed with Sun-Oh's love being poured into him in the dark, love meant for a man who was not there to receive it, and Eli lay still and stopped crying. Because he did not deserve the crying. He fell asleep eventually. When he woke in the gray morning, Sun-Oh was already gone to the kitchen, and there was a fresh glass of water on the nightstand, and a blister pack of pills he did not recognize. And the book with the bookmark had been moved from the nightstand to the drawer below, where he would not have to see it first thing in the morning. Eli sat up in bed and put his face in his hands. The first days in the Cedar House were the days Eli learned the shape of the wrongness. He had expected, stupidly, that it would feel like wearing a costume. That Yoel's body would be a suit of clothes he could put on and take off, and that when he put it on in the morning and went out into the living room, he would feel like an actor in a play. It was not like that. It was more like waking up in a house where all the doors had been moved a step to the left. Everything was almost where it should be. Nothing was exactly where it should be. The result was that he bumped into things constantly. Not physical things, though he bumped into those too. He bumped into Yoel-shaped reflexes that his new body had, and did not. He bumped into expectations that the people around him brought into the room without meaning to. He bumped into memories Sun-Oh referenced in passing, without checking first, and Eli had to catch each one and examine it, and decide on the fly whether he was allowed to smile, or nod, or say something. And if he was allowed to say something, what? On the second morning at home, Sun-Oh made eggs. Eli watched him crack them one-handed into a pan with the casual efficiency of a man who had cracked eggs in this pan every morning of his adult life. The pan was a cast iron that lived on the front burner. The butter was in a small blue dish on the counter. The salt was in a wooden bowl. Sun-Oh moved through the kitchen like a person who had learned the space by heart, and every motion was a small choreography with a missing partner. Over easy? Sunno said, without turning. Eli did not know how Yoel liked his eggs. He took a guess. Yes. Sunno made them over easy. He slid them onto a plate and brought the plate to the table with a slice of toast and set it down in front of Eli. And Eli picked up the fork and started eating. And Sunno sat down across from him with his own plate and watched him eat without seeming to watch. On the third bite, Eli realized he was eating the toast first. He did not know why he realized it. He realized it because Sunno had gone very quiet on the other side of the table. Eli looked up. Sunno was looking at the toast in his hand. "I thought you did not like the crust," Sunno said. The tone was so neutral it had to be carrying a weight. Eli looked down at the toast. He had eaten about half of it. The crust was, apparently, a thing Yoel had not liked. Eli could feel the mistake settling in the air between them, like a small, cold stone dropped into a glass of water. "I do not know," Eli said, slowly. "It tasted okay today." Sunno nodded. The nod was too slow. He picked up his own fork and resumed eating his eggs, and Eli watched his face and saw the thing Sunno was not saying, which was that a person who did not like bread crust was allowed to start liking it after a head injury, because the doctor had said so. The doctor had said a lot of things were going to be different. "Some things taste different now," Eli said. He said it quietly. He said it because he wanted to give Sunno an explanation Sunno would be able to live with, and because the explanation happened to be true in a way Sunno would never be able to verify. Sunno's face did something very small, a loosening around the eyes, a resettling of the mouth. He looked up at Eli and nodded again, slower this time, and the nod meant, "I have decided to believe this." "Tell me if other things taste different," Sunno said. "I will make them how you want them now." Eli felt the thing in his throat try to come up again. He swallowed it down with a bite of egg. "Okay," he said. The second hard thing, after the toast, was the photographs. There were a lot of photographs. Framed ones on the wall in the living room, a row of 3 above the wood stove, and smaller ones on a shelf by the back door, and a whole cluster on a corkboard in the kitchen between the refrigerator and the pantry. Eli did not look at them directly for the first 2 days, because he was afraid of what he would see. On the third day at home, while Sunno was in the shower, he stood in front of the corkboard and forced himself to look. Yoel An had been a beautiful man. Not in a loud way. Quiet, not loud. The set of his mouth, which was soft and slightly wry, and how he stood in photographs like someone who did not mind being photographed, but did not feel the need to arrange himself for the camera. His hair was shorter than Eli's current hair by about an inch. His smile was a small smile that stayed small, and meant more than a big smile would have. In one photograph, he was standing in a doorway with a mug in his hand and a cardigan half-buttoned wrong, and the expression on his face was the expression of a person looking at someone he loved, and the someone he loved was behind the camera, and Eli did not have to ask who. In the photograph next to that one, Yoel was standing on a beach in a coat too thin for the wind, and beside him was a woman with her arm hooked through his elbow. She was smaller than him. She had his face filtered through older sister weather, the same set of mouth and the same slope to the eyes, and she was laughing at something just outside the frame. Eli looked at the woman for a long time. He did not know who she was. He had a feeling, the way you have a feeling about a piece of furniture in a room you have never been in, that he was supposed to know. He was looking at her when Sunno came out of the bathroom. Eli stepped back from the corkboard and wiped his face on his sleeve and called over that he was getting himself a glass of water. And by the time Sunno came into the kitchen with a towel around his shoulders, Eli was at the sink with the tap running and the glass in his hand. Sunno stopped behind him and set a hand on the back of his neck, and warmth bloomed through Eli from the contact, a warmth he did not know how to name. "You are crying," Sunno said. Eli had not realized he was still crying. He put the glass down. "I was looking at the pictures," he said. It was true. He did not say what the true thing under the true thing was. Sunno's thumb moved, very slowly, along the edge of the bond mark, and the warmth spread down Eli's spine and out along his ribs. And Eli closed his eyes and let it happen, because he did not have the strength to stop it. "We can take them down," Suno said, "if it is too much." "No." Eli said it fast. He did not want the pictures taken down. Taking them down would have been another thing Suno had to do for the person in his house who was not his husband, and Eli could not bear the idea of Yoel's face being put in a box, because Eli had cried at it. "No, leave them," Eli said. "I want to look at them. I just have to get used to them again." Again. He had used the word again on purpose. He was learning fast which words to slip into his sentences to make Suno's shoulders drop half an inch. Suno's shoulders dropped half an inch. "Okay," he said. The hand on the back of Eli's neck stayed there a moment longer. Then Suno leaned in and pressed his mouth, briefly, to the top of Eli's head. And Eli felt it land in the roots of his hair and travel down to his heels. And something in his chest opened that he did not have a name for. It was not love. He did not get to call it love. It was the feeling of a person who had eaten alone at a kitchen counter for years being handed a plate by someone who remembered how he liked his eggs. And the feeling was so large and so unearned that it made him want to put his face in his hands. He had never been taken care of. That was the thing he kept coming back to. The group home in Grand Junction had given him a bed and a meal and a caseworker who kept getting reassigned, and none of that was care. The small town where he had worked and slept and bought groceries and gone home to an apartment that nobody visited had not been care either. He had been a person the world could lose without rearranging a single thing, and he had known that about himself. And he had lived inside that, knowing like it was a room with no windows. And now he was in a house where someone made him tea without asking, where someone reached for his hand in the dark, where someone pressed a kiss to his hair, like he was worth the breath it took to do it. And the guilt was that he could not stop leaning into it, could not stop wanting it, could not stop his body from softening every time Suno walked into the room. And he did not know whether that was the bond pulling at him or just what happened to a person who had been cold his whole life when someone finally let him near the fire. Eli opened his eyes and watched Suno's hands reach past him for the kettle and understood that whatever this feeling was, it was going to be the thing that destroyed him. Because he could not keep it, and he could not give it back, and he did not deserve it in the first place. Yenna came down on the 5th day at home. Eli had been warned, in a way. Suno had mentioned a sister several times during the careful cataloging of the day, that Suno did every morning like a nurse giving a patient a schedule. The sister was older. She had been trying to get to the hospital from the moment she got the call. But the same storm that had put Yoel on that road had shut down the Anchorage airport for 2 days, and every flight she tried to get on out of Seattle was canceled before it ever pushed back. And by the time the clouds lifted enough for a plane to land, the worst was over, and her brother was already breathing on his own. She had stayed for a few days after that, and she had gone home once the scans came back clean and it looked like her brother was going to be okay, and she was coming back now for the weekend, now that Yoel was home. Suno had not shown Eli a photograph of the sister, because Suno did not think he needed to. Yoel knew his own sister. Eli, on the morning of her arrival, stood in front of the corkboard in the kitchen and tried to memorize the woman in the beach photograph. The slope of her eyes, the line of her mouth, the shape of Yoel's face on a body that was not Yoel's. He stood there for a long time. He did not have any cover for this one. The doctor had said memory loss happens sometimes, sure. But the doctor had also said the scans were clean, and there was a difference between forgetting a word and looking your sister in the face like a stranger. He could not afford to look her in the face like a stranger. He had to recognize her on the first try. Suno said her name over breakfast. In passing, the way a husband mentions a sister-in-law he has known a long time. Yenna. The name landed in the room and Eli kept his expression flat, and then he nodded, and then he said, "What time is she coming?" Because asking what time someone was coming was a thing a person could ask without giving themselves away. "Around 11, Suno said. "She is bringing soup." "Okay." He spent the rest of the morning rehearsing. Yenna, 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 He repeated the name until the name stopped meaning anything, and then he repeated it some more, because meaning was not the point. Recognition was the point. He needed to be able to look at this woman when she walked through the door and say her name without hesitating, because her brother had been saying her name since he was old enough to talk. And a head injury was allowed to take a lot of things, but it should not take that. She arrived a little after 11. Son, oh, let her in. Eli was on the couch with a book in his lap that he had not been reading, and he heard the door open and close, and he heard the sound of a coat being shaken out, and he heard her voice for the first time. Her voice was low and rough and tired. It was the voice of a person who had cried herself empty at some point in the last 2 weeks and had come out the other side. He could hear her saying something quiet to Sunno in the entryway, and Sunno saying something quiet back, and then her footsteps coming into the living room. He stood up. He had decided that he would stand up. Standing up bought him a moment to look at her, and he needed every moment he could buy. He turned toward the doorway as she came through it, and there she was, smaller than he had expected, the same slope of mouth as the photograph, a coat too big for her, hair pulled back in a low knot, the hem of her jeans dark and wet from the snow she had tracked in on her boots. Her face. He looked at her face, and the recognition he was trying to summon did not come, because it was not in him to summon, because he had never seen this woman in his life before the photograph on the corkboard. He said her name anyway. Yina. It came out a little flat. He had aimed for warmth, and he had landed somewhere just short of it, like a person landing a step on a stair they thought was lower than it was. Her eyes flickered. He saw it happen. It was not a big flicker. It was the smallest movement around her eyes that a person could make and have it still count as a movement. Then, she crossed the room in 3 steps and put her arms around him. She held him tight. She was small, but her arms were strong, and she smelled like cold air and the inside of a rental car. And she held him for a long time, like a person holding someone they almost lost. Eli closed his eyes and held her back, because that was what a brother would do, and because holding someone who was hugging him was a thing he could copy without needing to remember her. Over her shoulder, he caught Sunno's eye. Sunno was standing in the hallway with her coat folded over his arm, watching them, and the look on his face was the look of a man watching 2 people he loved finally be in a room together again. And Eli understood, with a clarity that hurt, that he was failing Sunno twice over in this moment. He was failing him by not being Yoel, and he was failing him by letting Yenna believe he was. She pulled back. She kept her hands on his arms. Her eyes searched his face the way a person searches a face they have known their whole life, and Eli let her look without moving. Whatever she was looking for, she did not find it on the first pass. She blinked, and she made herself smile, and the smile was warm and real, and also carrying something she was not saying. "Let me look at you," she said, because that was what you said. Her voice was steady. "Your hair got long. He did not cut it for you?" The he meant Sunno. Sunno, in the hallway, made a small surrendering sound, like this was an old complaint. "He would not let me," Sunno said. "Said he wanted to do it himself, when he felt better." Vain to the last. She said it the way only an older sister could, affectionate and cruel in equal measure. Eli did not know what the right response was. He guessed at a small smile. It was apparently the right guess, because she made a small sound back, almost a laugh, and pulled him into another brief hug, and then let him go, and took her own coat back from Sunno. "I brought the soup," she said, practical now. "Let me put it in the pot, and you 2 sit down. Yoel, go sit. You look like you are going to fall over." He went and sat. He did not argue. He had learned, in a week, that the quickest way to avoid being studied was to do what people suggested immediately, because people only studied you when you hesitated. She moved around the kitchen with the easy familiarity of someone who had been there many times. She and Sunno talked quietly while she heated the soup, their voices dropping into a register that was clearly for each other, not for him. Eli listened, without meaning to. It was not a conversation hiding anything. It was just the soft catching up two people do when they have been worried about the same thing for a week and are now worried about slightly different parts of it. "He is doing better," Suno was saying. "The head is better. The bruising on the ribs is almost gone. He slept through the night once." "Eating? Some. Not as much as I would like. He is quieter than usual. Doctor said to give it time." "Quieter how?" Suno paused. Eli could feel him looking for the word. "He does not tease me as much," Suno said. It was the saddest sentence Eli had heard in his life. He closed his eyes on the couch and pressed the back of his head into the cushion and listened to her say nothing for a long moment, and then say, "He will. Give him the month." She did not sound certain when she said it. The certainty in her voice was the kind a person manufactures for the benefit of the man she is trying to comfort. Eli kept his eyes closed and pretended he had not heard the gap in it. The soup was good. They ate it at the kitchen table, and she did most of the talking, and Eli figured out fast that getting through a meal with her meant nodding in the right places and letting her roll. She was a talker who did not need many cues. She was also, Eli realized, compensating. She was talking to fill the silence her brother was not filling, because her brother had always filled the silence between the two of them. And now, the silence was on the couch with a spoon and a half-finished bowl of soup, and she was paving over the quiet because the quiet scared her. Twice during the meal, without looking like she was doing it, she watched him when he was not expecting it. Once when he picked up his glass with the wrong hand and had to set it down and switch. Once when she said something about their mother, and his face did not move, because their mother was a person Eli had no information about. And there was no expression in his repertoire for a sentence about a woman he had never heard of. She watched both times, and both times she let it pass, and both times the watching went into a small file behind her eyes that Eli could feel her opening, but not yet reading. When she left, she hugged him again at the door. She held him a little longer this time. She held him like someone trying to feel for a shape under his skin. "I will come back next weekend," she said, into his hair. "Okay. Eat more. Okay." She pulled back. Her hands were on his arms now. Her eyes searched his face one more time, and she smiled. The same warm and carrying something smile as when she had walked in, and she said, "I missed you." Eli said, "I missed you too." It came out naturally. It was the first real lie he had told her, and it was also, somehow, not a lie, because he had missed her like a person misses a mother they never had, and he had only known her for an hour. She left. The cedar house went quiet. Suno closed the door behind her and leaned his forehead against it for a moment, not turning around, and Eli watched his back and understood that this was how Suno took a breath when no one was watching, and that Suno had not known Eli was still in the room. "She looked good," Eli said, softly. Suno straightened. He turned. He walked back to Eli across the small living room with the slow deliberation of a tired man whose body had been running on adrenaline for 2 weeks, and he put his hand on the back of Eli's neck, over the bond mark, and pressed his forehead to Eli's forehead and closed his eyes. "I was worried about how you would be with her," Suno said. "You did great. You did great." Like he was a child who had managed a difficult first day at school. Eli wanted to laugh and cry at the same time, and neither came out, and instead he just stood there with his forehead against Suno's forehead and let the bond mark pulse between them with Suno's tenderness washing through it, and let Suno's breath go slow and even against his mouth, and let himself be praised for something he had not earned. He found the journal that night because he was looking for it. He had decided, lying awake next to Suno, that he needed to know more about the man whose life he was inside of, and that the honest way to know was not going to work, because Suno was too careful with what he was saying, and Yenna was going to notice if he asked too many questions. He needed a source that could not flinch. He got up in the middle of the night to go to the bathroom, which was a thing he had been doing anyway, because his new body had a different relationship with water than his old body had had. And on his return he paused in the hall outside the closed door that Suno had never opened. It was the door across from the bathroom. It had been closed since the day they had come home. Eli had not asked about it because he had assumed, correctly, that it was not a room he was supposed to ask about. He opened the door. It was the studio. He knew it was the studio the second he stepped in, because the smell hit him. Beeswax and old paper, and a faint, sweet chemical smell he would later learn was hide glue. The room was small. There was a window along the back wall that looked out into the spruce trees, and a long bench under the window with a clamp and a stack of bricks and a pot of something that had dried into a crust, a shelf of tools, a shelf of papers, a shelf of finished books, slender, beautifully bound, books meant to be held, not read. On the bench, face down, was a notebook. He knew, even before he picked it up, what it was. He picked it up anyway. It was a soft, leather-covered notebook, the corners rounded from being carried in a pocket, something a person keeps because a person who works with books cannot help keeping books. He turned it over in his hands. He sat down on the stool at the bench. He opened to the last written page. The last entry was dated the day before Yoel had been hit. It was short. It said, "Suno comes home tomorrow. I cannot wait one more hour." That was it. That was the whole entry. Below it, the page was blank, and would stay blank, because the person who had been going to write the next line had stepped off a curb in the snow, and the next line had never come. Eli read the sentence 3 times. Then he put the notebook down on the bench and pressed both hands over his mouth and rocked forward on the stool, and his whole body shook silently because he could not let himself make a sound, because Suno was asleep down the hall and could not hear this, could not ever hear this. And Eli was alone in a room that did not belong to him, with a notebook that did not belong to him, weeping for a man he had never met. He wept for Yoel first. He wept for the sentence, "I cannot wait one more hour." He wept because whoever Yoel had been, he had loved Suno like a person loves a single human being only once in their life, and he had not made it home to him. And the man he had been waiting for had come home to a hospital bed instead. He wept because the sentence was so simple, and because simple sentences were the ones that killed you, and because Yoel had not known it would be the last thing he ever wrote. Then he wept for Suno. He wept because Suno did not know about the notebook. Suno had not opened this room since the day of the accident. The notebook had been sitting here on the bench the whole time, with that sentence on it, and Suno had not seen it. And Eli could not tell Suno that it was here, because telling him meant giving him a grief he could not survive, on top of the grief he was already surviving. Then he wept for himself. He wept because he had read Yoel's last sentence, and because he was now the only person on earth who had read it, and because he was an intruder in a room that was a shrine he had not been invited into. He wept because Eli Sohn had been a person with nothing, a studio apartment with no photographs on the walls, a phone that did not ring. No parents, not even a name to put on a form under emergency contact. Just the group home, and then the aging out, and then the jobs, and the apartments, and the silence. A whole life so small that it could end in a crosswalk, and the only people who would notice were the ones who had to fill his shift at the grocery store. And now, he was sitting in a dead man's studio, in a dead man's body, in a house where someone had left the light on for him, and water on the nightstand, and a hand reaching across the bed in the dark. And the horror was not that he had woken up here. The horror was that waking up here felt like the first good thing that had ever happened to him, and it had come at the cost of someone else's entire life. He sat on the stool in the studio for a long time. He put the notebook back exactly where he had found it, face down, the corner lined up with the crack in the bench top. He looked around the room once more, at the tools and the papers and the beautiful slender finished books on the shelf, and he understood that this was Yoel's real house, and that the rest of it, the kitchen and the bedroom and the couch, were just the places Yoel had slept between visits to this room. He went back to bed. Suno stirred when he climbed in, reached for his hand without opening his eyes, found it, laced their fingers together, and settled. "Where did you go?" Suno murmured. Bathroom. Okay. Suno's breathing evened out. Eli lay on his back and stared at the ceiling and let the tears roll down the sides of his face into his hair. And he did not wipe them away, because wiping them away would have required moving his hand, and his hand was being held. The second week at home was worse than the first, because in the second week, Eli started to get comfortable. He did not mean to get comfortable. He fought it. He reminded himself every morning, standing in front of the bathroom mirror looking at the face that was not his face, that he was a trespasser, and that trespassers did not get to enjoy the houses they broke into. He reminded himself every time Suno reached for his hand at the table, every time Suno set a cup of tea down in front of him without being asked, every time Suno looked up from a book and caught his eye and smiled, the small private smile reserved for the person across the room. He reminded himself, and it did not matter. He had been starving for so long that the first taste of warmth had undone him, and the warmth kept coming, and his resistance was dissolving into it faster than his mind could keep up with. He slept better in the second week. He ate more. He stopped flinching when Suno's hand settled on the back of his neck over the bond mark. He started, without meaning to sit in the chair at the kitchen table that was clearly Yoel's chair. And one morning he caught himself reaching for the cabinet above the sink for the specific mug he had started to like, a heavy gray mug with a chip in the rim, and the reach was automatic. And he froze with his hand in the air and had to put the mug down on the counter before he could pick it back up. Suno had not gone back to the hospital since the day he had landed. Eli had understood, in pieces, that this was not a small thing. Suno had mentioned, over dinner, that he never took time off, and that the department had approved the leave without asking any questions, and that his chief had walked into Yoel's room on the second night and put a hand on his shoulder and told him to go home when he was ready and not to think about coming back until his husband was better. Suno had not gone home. He had stayed in the chair beside the bed for the 3 days Yoel was under, and then for the days after, when the man in the bed was awake but quiet, and the doctor was watching everyone. He had showered in the staff locker room because he knew the code, and he had eaten what the nurses brought him because they brought it without asking. And he had read the chart every time a new note went on it, because he was a surgeon and could not stop himself from reading a chart even when the chart was his husband's. He had told Eli all of this in pieces, over different meals, in the flat, tired voice of a man recounting things that had happened to someone else. Once, on the second night at home, he had said the part Eli understood was the part underneath all of it. He had said it looking down at his hands. "He was coming to get me from the airport," Suno had said. "I told him to take an Uber. The roads were bad. There was a warning out. I told him I would meet him at the house. He said he wanted to be the first thing I saw when I came through the gate." He had not said anything else after that. He had just sat at the table and looked at his hands, and Eli had understood that Sun-Oh had been carrying that sentence in his mouth for 2 weeks, and that Sun-Oh believed, in some part of himself, that no surgeon's training was going to talk out of him, that he had killed his husband by getting on a plane. Eli had nodded and not known what to say. He had not known, until that moment, how much of himself Sun-Oh had been putting on hold to sit in a chair beside a hospital bed, and then to sit across a kitchen table from a man who looked like his husband and did not know how to drink tea without checking his face. First, Sun-Oh used the time to be present. That was the only word Eli had for it. He was present in a way Eli had never experienced another human being being present with him. He was not hovering. He was not smothering. He was just there, in whatever room Eli was in, reading on the couch while Eli read on the chair, cooking at the stove while Eli sat at the table with his tea, walking behind him down the hall at night with a hand ghosting at the small of his back, not touching, just there, just making sure he was within reach in case Eli turned around and needed him. No one had ever been within reach for Eli Sohn. Eli had not known, before this, that within reach was a thing you could feel. He had assumed, in his old life, that loneliness was just a fact about the world, like cold was a fact about winter. He had not known that the cold was a thing your body was making because nothing warm had ever been close enough for long enough to teach it how to stop. Suno was teaching him how to stop. Suno did not know he was teaching anyone anything. Suno thought he was just being with his husband. And Eli, who had never been anyone's anything, was melting into the lesson faster than his mind could keep up with. The hardest moment of the second week came in the late afternoon, in the bedroom. Suno had come out of the shower. He had a towel around his waist and another around his shoulders, and his hair was wet, and he was looking for a clean shirt in the dresser. Eli was sitting on the edge of the bed with a book in his lap that he was not reading, because Suno had walked in, and the room had gotten small, and Eli's whole attention had been redirected to the line of Suno's back as he bent over the dresser drawer. Suno found a shirt. He straightened. He pulled the shirt over his head and let the towel drop, and then he turned and caught Eli looking. He did not look away. "You are staring," Suno said. There was a small smile in it. Not teasing, exactly. Something older than teasing. A smile a husband gives a husband when the husband has been caught doing something the other one has been caught doing 1,000 times before. "Sorry," Eli said. "Do not be sorry." Suno walked over to the bed. He sat down next to Eli, close enough that their thighs touched through the fabric of their pajamas, and the warmth of his body came through the cotton like a small sun. His hair was dripping a little. A drop ran from his temple down along his jaw, and Eli watched it move, unable to look away, and did not know what to do with his hands. "You have been quiet all day," Suno said. "Talk to me." Eli did not know what to say. He did not know what Yoel would have said. He did not know what he, Eli, would have said either, because he had never been sitting on the edge of a bed next to an alpha who had just gotten out of a shower, with the alpha's thigh pressed warm against his thigh, and been asked to talk. "I do not know what to say," he said. "Say anything." "I am tired." "I know." "I feel like I am still not right." "I know that too." Suno's hand came up and cupped the side of Eli's face. The palm was warm and dry from the towel. His thumb brushed along Eli's cheekbone once, lightly, like someone touching something delicate and precious and not willing to leave it alone. "I have been thinking," Suno said, "about how to say this. I do not want to say it wrong." The bond mark on Eli's neck pulsed. "Okay," Eli said. "I am not in a hurry for you to be how you were before," Suno said. "I want you to know that. I keep catching you trying to remember things, trying to laugh at the right time, trying to be how you used to be. You do not have to try. I do not care if you are different now. I do not care if you are different for the rest of our lives. I just want you here. I just want to keep sitting next to you." Eli could not see Suno's face very well, because his eyes had filled up. He blinked, and the tears went down. He did not wipe them. "Okay," he said. "Okay," Suno said. "I do not know if I am going to be the same." "You do not have to be. I do not know how much of me is coming back." "You do not have to come back. Just stay." Suno leaned in and pressed his mouth to Eli's forehead, then to the bridge of his nose. Then, slowly, like asking a question, to Eli's mouth. Eli pulled back. He did not mean to. His body did it before his brain could stop it, a flinch so small it was almost nothing. But Suno felt it. Suno felt it because Suno had been kissing this mouth a long time, and the mouth had never flinched, and the difference between never and once was a canyon. Suno pulled back 1/2 inch. His forehead rested on Eli's forehead. His eyes were closed. His breath was shaking. "I love you," Suno said. "God, I love you. I did not know if I was ever going to say that to you again." Eli opened his mouth. He wanted to give Suno something back, anything. But every sentence he could think of was a sentence that belonged to the man Suno was talking to, and Eli was not that man, and any comfort he offered would be stolen from someone who could no longer offer it himself. "I am here," he said. It was not enough. He could feel that it was not enough, from the way Suno's breathing changed, a small hitch, the sound of a man receiving less than he had hoped for and deciding not to ask for more. Suno's hand came up and cradled the back of Eli's head, gently, and held him there, forehead to forehead, and did not try to kiss him again. Eli closed his eyes and stayed still and hated himself for pulling away, and hated himself more for the part of him that had not wanted to pull away at all, the part that had been so hungry for so long that it would take warmth from anywhere, even from a man whose grief it was feeding on. He fell asleep with Suno's arm around his waist and Suno's face pressed into the back of his neck. And the last thing he felt before sleep was the guilt, sitting in his chest like a stone. Because every hour he stayed in this house, he was taking something that did not belong to him. And every hour he stayed, he wanted to leave less. He woke up in the dark. It was the middle of the night. He did not know what had woken him. He was still in Suno's arms. Suno's breathing was slow and even against his neck. The house was quiet. Outside the window, the snow was falling again, slow and heavy and soundless, the way it had been falling off and on since they had come home from the hospital. He was awake because the bond mark on his neck was humming. The hum was different from the confused flare he had been feeling since waking up. This was a low, specific tone, like a tuning fork that has been struck. It was coming from Suno's end of the bond, pouring through the mark on Eli's neck, and it was not grief this time. It was need. Suno's body, even in sleep, was reaching through the bond for the person it was attached to, and the person it was attached to was gone. And the only thing on the other end of the thread was Eli. It was not stopping. Eli lay very still in the dark, and listened with his whole spine, and understood, slowly, that the bond was open. That Suno's claiming mark on this neck was a door, and the door had no lock, and the bond was pouring through it looking for someone to hold on to, and Eli was the only one here. The bond did not care who he was. The bond only knew that this body had a pulse, and a scent, and a neck with a mark on it, and that was enough. The bond wanted to latch on. Eli understood that, and the understanding was so large and so terrible that it pushed him up out of Suno's arms before he had decided to move. Suno made a small sound in his sleep and did not wake. Eli slipped out of bed in his bare feet. He padded into the hall. He stood in the dark hallway between the bedroom and the bathroom and the closed studio door, and the bond mark on his neck pulsed harder, insistent, pulling him toward the back of the house, toward the back door, toward the cold, wet porch outside. He went. He did not know why he went. He went because the pulling was not a thing he could refuse. He opened the back door and stepped out onto the porch in his bare feet, and his pajamas in the cold hit him immediately, deep and clean and wrong, and the porch boards were dusted with snow, and beyond the rail, the yard was a white expanse under the falling flakes, and the spruce trees were black shapes in the dark, and the bond mark on his neck was pulling him forward, off the porch, into the snow, into the dark. He stopped at the top of the porch steps. He could feel it now. He could feel it clearly. The bond was trying to claim him, not as Yoel. Yoel was gone. There was no trace of Yoel in this body, no echo, no ghost, nothing left of the man who had lived here except the shape of the space he had occupied. The bond did not care about that. The bond was a mechanism, not a memory. It felt a living body in a marked neck, and it wanted to complete the circuit, and Eli was the circuit, and all he had to do was stop resisting. The bond was trying to let him in. Eli stood on the porch in the snow, with the bond singing in his neck, and he understood, with a clarity that was going to ruin his life, that if he let it, the bond would accept him. That bonds latched onto a body and a scent, and that the body was still here, and the scent had changed, but the mark had not, and the only thing missing was a soul willing to receive the other end, and his soul was standing right here on the porch in the cold. He could let it in. He could let the bond take him. He could become the person on the other end of Suno's bond. He could belong to Suno, for real, in the only language a bond knew how to speak. He could stop being a trespasser. He could stop being a thief. He could stop lying in the dark, waiting to be found out. He could just be the person Suno was holding, full stop, without the asterisk, and he could live in this cedar house and drink this tea and sit in this chair and be cared for by this man for the rest of his life. All he had to do was say yes. The porch boards were burning cold under his feet in a way that had stopped feeling like pain and started feeling like nothing, which was worse. The snow was landing in his hair and on his shoulders and melting through his shirt. The Bond was humming, pulling, asking, and Eli was alone on the porch with the answer already in his mouth, and the answer was yes, and the yes was crawling up his throat, and he was going to say it. He was going to say it out loud into the dark. He was going to give himself to the Bond because he had nothing else to give to anyone anywhere, and no one had ever asked him for anything, and this thing was asking him, and he was going to say yes. He was going to. And he thought about the notebook. He thought about the sentence on the last written page. I cannot wait one more hour. He thought about the man who had written it the night before, in the studio, at the bench where Eli had sat on the stool and wept into his hands. He thought about Yoelan, who had not known he was writing his last sentence, who had been thinking about his husband's flight, and about the fern he was going to repot, and about the crust he was not going to eat, and about 100 other small living things that had been his life. He thought about Yoel getting in the car the next evening to drive to the airport, because his husband had been gone too long and was finally coming home. And he thought about the truck coming around the corner before Yoel ever got there. He thought about Sun-Oh landing to a phone call that should not have been waiting for him. He thought about the man who was going to have loved him for 10 more years and 20 more years and 40 more years, if a truck had not come around a corner in the snow. He thought about Sun-Oh, asleep in the bed he had just climbed out of, who was still married to that man, whose hand still knew the shape of that man's hand, whose mouth had said "I love you" to a ceiling in the dark and had meant it in a language only the two of them spoke. If Eli said yes to the Bond, Sun-Oh would never know. That was the thing. Sun-Oh would wake up, and the Bond would feel right for the first time since the accident, and Sun-Oh would tell himself it was the recovery. And Sun-Oh would keep holding the hand of a stranger and believing it was his husband's hand, and he would never get the chance to grieve properly, and he would never get to choose whether to let go. Eli would have stolen that choice from him. Eli would have sealed Sun-Oh into a bond with a person Sun-Oh had never met, without Sun-Oh's knowledge, without Sun-Oh's consent. Eli could not do that to him. He could not take Sun-Oh's right to know who was in his bed. He closed his mouth around the yes and held it there and felt the Bond pulling, asking, and he breathed through his nose and shook his head, once, in the dark, alone, to the snow and the spruce trees and the Bond itself, and the yes stayed behind his teeth. The back door opened behind him. "Yoel?" Sun-Oh's voice. Sleep rough, confused, worried. Eli turned. Sun-Oh was standing in the doorway in a t-shirt and boxers and bare feet. His hair was flattened on one side from the pillow. The yellow light from the hallway behind him made a shape of him in the door that was so familiar, Eli's chest hurt. Sun-Oh's eyes moved over him, the snow in his hair, the wet shirt clinging to his ribs. The bare feet on the frozen boards. Sun-Oh categorized those things first, because those were things a surgeon had answers to. Cold. Confused. How long? Come inside. "Come here," Sun-Oh said, stepping onto the porch. "Come inside. You are going to lose your feet." Eli did not move. "Yoel, please, inside." "Sun-Oh." His voice was shaking. He did not know when it had started. The snow was landing on both of them now, and the porch boards were past cold under his bare feet, and the Bond was still humming in his neck, quieter now, like it had said what it needed to say and was listening. "Sun-Oh, I need to tell you something." He took a breath. It was the breath a person takes before stepping off a ledge, the breath of a man who had decided, in the last 30 seconds, that he was not going to be able to live with himself if he did not say the next thing. "My name is not Yoel." Sun-Oh did not move. "My name is Eli," his voice cracked. He pushed through it. "Eli Sohn. I am 26. I grew up in a group home in Colorado. I worked at a grocery store." Sun-Oh's mouth opened. Nothing came out. "A truck hit me on the night of January the 9th. And then I woke up here, in this body, with your hand in mine and a name on my chart that was not my name." He was shaking now. Not just his voice, but his whole frame. the cold and the confession working through him at the same time. I did not say anything because I did not know how to tell you without breaking your life a second time. So I came home with you. I let you teach me the chair and the mug and the drawer with the pajamas. Yoel, Sunho said, but the name came out like a question, not a correction. I let you kiss me this afternoon and I flinched because I am not him, Sunho. Every time you reach for me, you are reaching for someone who is not here anymore. The snow was landing on both of them. Sunho had not moved from the doorway, his bare feet on the frozen boards, his face working through something too large to show. I have been in this body for 2 weeks, Eli said. And for 2 weeks I have been letting you hold my hand because I had nothing my whole life, and then I woke up and had everything and I did not know how to give it back, he swallowed. And tonight the bond was trying to lock onto me and I almost let it because I wanted to stay so badly I could not breathe. But if I had, you would have spent the rest of your life calling a stranger by the wrong name, and I could not do that to you. His voice gave out on the last part. He forced it back. I am so sorry, Sunho. Your husband's name was Yoel. My name is Eli, and I do not know anything else. He was crying by the end of it. He did not know when he had started. The snow was on his face, and the tears were on his face, and the two were melting into each other, and he could not tell them apart. His hands were empty at his sides. The bond in his neck had gone very quiet. Sunho did not move. He stood in the falling snow on the porch in his t-shirt and boxers and bare feet, with the open doorway glowing behind him, and his face did not do anything for a long moment. It was not a blank face. It was a face that had too many things happening on it at once for any of them to show. The end of part 1. Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed the story, tell me your thoughts in the comments. I'd love to hear from you.